Well, we're at 128 participants so far, so I guess we're in. All right, we'll keep waiting because it keeps, I'm watching it. It's keeping jumping up. So we'll just wait until it tapers off a sec. Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started. People may still be joining us, but I think that's the people who are here. I want to say welcome to everybody. I want to say thank you for joining. I especially want to thank our three terrific panelists who I'll introduce in a minute. And I think we're going to have a really, really good discussion tonight. Before we actually dig into the discussion, I have two sets of announcements, actually. One is of preliminary announcements. One is something that we say for all ASH events, and then I want to introduce this particular series. In terms of our events, we first want to acknowledge that the land that Harvard is on and that we are sitting on, so to speak, was the traditional home of the Massachusetts people, and Cambridge was long a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We also want to let you know about the Harvard Votes Challenge, particularly if you're a Harvard affiliated person. Our goal is to get 100% participation from people from not only from the Kennedy School, but from Harvard in terms of voter registration. And the Harvard Votes Challenge is eager to have you check in and make sure that you know all the ways in which you can get involved. And Melissa has just put it into the chat. So you should go there and make sure that you sign up in every way that you can. And lastly, I want to let everybody know that the event is being recorded and will be available afterwards on the ASH Center YouTube channel and also on the ASH Center website. Tonight is actually the first event in a series that the ASH Center is doing specifically related to the remarkable election that we're all living through. The series is called Democracy, Justice, and the 2020 Elections. And what we're going to do is look at how the elections are going. When there's obviously a lot of coverage, discussion, polling, candidates, debates, who's going to control the Senate. That's sort of not our lane. Our lane really is more about how the election is working and what people are seeing in terms of making it work, what people are seeing, but also what people are doing in terms of making it work in this most fraught and consequential election. So, some of the kinds of questions we're going to look at are what are the challenges and threats to the 2020 election and the democratic process that undergirds it? How resilient is the process? What's the impact of the virus going to be ultimately in the situation? How motivated and engaged are voters? And how can we do workarounds from all of the barriers and challenges that are undoubtedly coming our way? So those are the kinds of questions we're going to do. I think it's, as everyone knows, this is, we're 50 some odd days away from actually exactly 7 weeks, right? 8 weeks, I mean, 56 days. This is Tuesday, this being Tuesday, from the election. We know actually it's not going to be an election day. It will be an election week or an election month. And all of us are going to have to do our best to work our way through it. Anyway, I can't think of three better people to start to work our way through these issues with than the three people who we have tonight, who are absolutely leading, terrific, I would say, without embarrassing anybody, practitioners of the election process in the field. We have Janai Nelson, who is a leading voting rights advocate and litigator and has been for many, many years. She's the Associate Director-Counsel for the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, Inc. She also was the Associate Dean at St. John's Law School once upon a time and Professor of Law at NYU. So this is a woman who knows the litigation landscape up and down, and we'll be eager to hear more from her. Judd Choate is the Director of the Division of Elections of the Department of State of Colorado. He'd been there for 11 years, since 2009. Prior to being there, he was a professor of politics and the presidency at the University of Nebraska. Spent some time in private practice doing election law, but has been in this position for 11 years with 4 secretaries of the state, he's told me, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And under his leadership, Colorado has made enormous strides in terms of voter participation, going from 26th in the country in the year 2000 to 2nd in the country in 2016 and 2018. Not ready to call it the Colorado miracle yet, Judd, but you're getting closer than most. And lastly, Hobert Flynn. Karen is the national president of Common Cause. She has been in that position for 4 years, but has been with the organization for 25 anyway, both in various positions at the national level, but close to my heart, she was the Connecticut director and has been, for people who know Connecticut at all, really the leading voice on campaign finance reform for the state. And Connecticut has a real good public financing system, largely due to Karen's efforts. She's also the co-chair of the Democracy Initiative and a very, very close friend. All right, so let's jump into it. We chose a scary title for the talk, What Keeps You Up at Night? The goddesses know there are plenty of things to keep us up at night. But I think actually we're going to also be broader. We are going to talk about what keeps these 3 practitioners up at night, but we're also going to talk about their work, the work that they're doing to try to make sure that things go well, and also come back. We'll have some questions at the audience later, but we'll also come back and ask them what gives them hope in this cycle. Okay, so Janai, I think I'm going to start with you. This is already, I think, the most litigious election cycle in American history. What do you see? What keeps you up at night?
Well, that's such a great question. But first, let me thank you for having me as part of this kickoff discussion and what sounds like will be an excellent and timely series leading up to the November elections. What keeps me up at night? I'm wondering if you're somehow peeking through my window and see the insomnia that has just taken over my life. I think what keeps me up at night is also what fuels me and fuels the entire legal team at the Legal Defense Fund every day. And that is the transformative potential of the vote, particularly in this increasingly diverse electorate, on the one hand, and then the array of attempts to extinguish that power on the other hand. And this is happening on a whole host of fronts, from polling place closures to voter purges to the disenfranchisement of people with criminal convictions, threats to early voting. There's just an array of attempts to limit the power of the vote. And then you have the overlay of the pandemic, which you mentioned, which makes all of that much more challenging and disconcerting. But perhaps most concerning to me is that we have a Department of Justice that has effectively abandoned the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. We have someone in the White House who has threatened to send law enforcement to the polls to intimidate voters, straight out of a partisan voter suppression playbook. And we basically have an entire administration that has turned a blind eye to election interference, both domestic and foreign. So those are the nightmares that I have. What's currently happening and what potentially is likely to happen as we get closer to November and on November 3rd. So in light of those grand advocations of duty to protect our elections and those direct assaults on the right to vote, it's difficult to get any sleep these days.
Do a quick follow-up, just Janai, just to say, so, obviously all these court cases, and many of them are state, many of them federal, they're ruling in different ways. You see a kind of a trend within the judiciary of what kinds of decisions are being made?
It's a mixed bag, actually. We've actually won some cases and have seen some judges, hew to the letter of the law and protect the right to vote. We've also seen our Supreme Court in too many instances seem to abandon those principles. But we all know that the judiciary is becoming increasingly conservative, that there's a significant effort to pack the courts, that Mitch McConnell has many bills on his desk to protect our elections, but is instead spending every waking hour pushing judges through a system that is really tilting our judiciary in a very dangerous way. So, we do take heart that there are still some judges who are, have impartiality and are loyal to the law, but we are becoming increasingly concerned about the courts as an ongoing avenue for protecting our democracy.
Great, thank you. Judd, you have the responsibility for Colorado to make sure that everything goes well. But I know you're also a leader in the National Association of State Election Directors called NAACP. What do you see as what are your chief concerns, either from a Colorado perspective or from a national perspective?
Well, the first thing I guess I would say is that I'm concerned, like Janai is, that the conversation nationally has exposed some pretty significant rifts in our public dialogue that make you sort of feel like the whole concept of democracy is under threat. That if the central pillar of a working democracy is that people believe in the outcomes, and if you don't believe in the outcomes, once an election's over, people will fight the outcome, and they'll both that they were wronged, and then you have the recipe for sort of a long-standing problem. So that's sort of the thing that keeps me up at night. It's more of an existential threat to the very idea of democracy. But really, I mean, I'm an elections professional, and so I work in this area as an administrator, not as an advocate for one side or the other. So a lot of the lead up to an election is about instituting new programs, making sure that people are doing it right, training, facilitating the sort of structures of the problem that, frankly, that those days are over now, and now we're in the blocking and tackling stage of the election, where we just have to make sure that it is pulled off. And so we're working on just the basics of making sure that Colorado's election goes off without a hitch at this point. And I hope that, and I know that my colleagues around the country are doing the same.
What about, you're in a position Colorado has done a lot of work with mail-in voting over the years, expanded it greatly. What's your sense of the current state of the controversy around the U.S. Postal Service, and how much of an impact do you think it's going to have?
Well, we sued the United States Postal Service over the weekend, so that kind of gives you a sense of where we're at with the USPS. They sent out a postcard to every household in America that was kind of a cookie cutter postcard that had 5 points to prepare for the election, and one of them was contact your local elections official to ask for your absentee ballot. Well, we're a vote by mail state, so everybody's going to get a ballot in the mail whether they want it or not. And so that was very much contrary to our model, and frankly informing our voters of things which were not true about our election. So we sued to block that. We're also involved in the Washington state lawsuit about the various rumors and talking points that we've heard about the USPS and their preparation for the upcoming election, about equipment being misplaced and overtime hours being reduced and all those kinds of things. So we are also a member of that lawsuit. That being said, the people we work with in Denver, Colorado, and the people in this region and frankly, the people that we work with in the entire Western region of the United States Postal Service, we have fantastic relationships with, and long-standing relationships in which they do very good work for us. We work together as a team on many elections-related issues. So I have all the faith in the world that the people that do the work on the ground will do an excellent job. They're wonderful people who bust their hump for this democracy every 4 years, 2 years, year, whenever we have an election. But we are worried about what's happening in Washington when it comes to the USPS.
Thank you. No, that's a useful kind of multifaceted perspective. Karen, Common Cause I know has somewhere around 25 chapters in states around the country, kind of working every day to protect the elections and to fight for pro-voter and voter-friendly policies. So what are you seeing? We'll start with the negative. What keeps you up at night as you're looking around the country?
So thank you, Miles. It's great to be here. And I share Janai and Judd's concerns about, so many things that we face. But even coming into the 2020 elections, we already had a lot to worry about, in my view. First, we've had more than a decade of vote suppression measures passing in states and localities that, with an effort to make it more difficult for people to vote. We had a Supreme Court that gutted the Voting Rights Act, and now we have a Department of Justice, as Janai said, that does not enforce the law. We have faced foreign interference at an unprecedented level in the 2016 election, and we have a president who, even when he was a candidate, spread disinformation on a regular basis, saying that that if he did not win the election, it would mean widespread voter fraud. We also have aging election infrastructure and voting machines that malfunction, and still some states, I believe 8 states, that don't have ballots. So if there's a problem, it's hard to do audits, or you can't do audits. And if that wasn't enough, we face a global pandemic that has had a real impact on elections. So back in the primaries in March, in Ohio, we had them cancel the primary the night before the primary started. So confusion. In Wisconsin, we saw people have to choose between their health and voting. And we saw long lines that were really challenging. We also have right-wing groups that are working with the RNC, the Trump campaign, and others to bring a multi-million-dollar strategy to suppress the vote by recruiting retired military and police to be poll watchers, to stand outside polling places, particularly targeting Black and Brown communities. We have seen efforts as we have worked to expand voting options so people can vote safely, either voting by mail, no excuse absentee voting, early voting, and safe in-person voting. We see efforts to block those efforts, and Janai can talk about the litigation around those. We've seen a disinformation campaign where they're spending millions of dollars attacking reforms, the kinds of reforms we see in places like Colorado that work and do not have voter fraud. And we see attacks on the post office, not just blocking resources that go to the post office and to state and local election officials so that they can beef up their ability to respond and do these kinds of programs like vote by mail. But also Postmaster DeJoy has both put an overtime cap on US post office employees, blocked late and extra trips to allow them to catch up with backlogged deliveries, and also removed sorting machines and mailboxes. And so finally, I'd say, aggressive litigation, the kind of which we have not seen in any election, that it's going to make things really challenging. So to me, those are the things that we are facing and that keep me up at night. But we also are doing work to combat those things.
Great. I guess I should say thank you, but that was a chilling rendition of
Sorry.
of all the things that we're facing. All right, Janai, I want to come back to you. And from the LDF's point of view, what are some of the key cases that you're working on, or what do you think is going to have the most important effect? I think we may have lost you, Janai.
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me still?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
All right.
There you are.
In the process of unmuting, I think I turned off my video. Pardon me. Well, Karen touched on a number of issues of concern, and particularly when she underscored the point about not having to risk your health in order to vote. I can't say enough how much this pandemic has exacerbated, as Karen pointed out, what were already significant failures in our electoral process and in our systems and structures. So under ordinary circumstances, protecting voters and their access to polls is critical, but in the midst of a pandemic, it takes on an entirely new meaning and urgency. And of course, the racial disparities related to the pandemic are just staggering. African Americans and Latinos are 3 times more likely than whites, to contract COVID, and 2 times as likely to die from COVID. So exercising their constitutional right to vote is, it's a gamble with their health and those of their loved ones with whom they may be sharing housing and shelter. So we're presently litigating 2 critical cases concerning voter access and racial discrimination. Just last week, we started a trial in Alabama where we pushed the state of Alabama already to expand access to vote by mail and absentee voting in the primaries. And now we are pushing not only for that same expansion of voting in the fall elections, which it looks like they're going to move forward with, but we're fighting their resistance to continuing to require voters to have 2 witnesses to complete their absentee ballot. And also they're blocking counties that want to provide curbside voting from providing it. So not only is the state not affirmatively providing curbside voting, which would be extremely helpful, but there are some counties that are willing to do it on their own, and the state is blocking that. So that's the type of interference and obstruction to health and safety and to democracy that we're experiencing. We're seeking similar relief in the state of Louisiana, which has very limited access to absentee ballots and vote by mail, which puts their significant population of African Americans and other vulnerable populations at risk. And in just a few weeks, we're going to be going to trial in Florida at Prairie View A&M University, where we represent students at that historically Black college or university. And we are fighting against Waller County, which is a repeat and serial voting rights offender. And they stripped the campus of early voting. So those are just some instances of the ways in which votes can be, or the voting process can be interfered with, can challenge the health of voters, can make it difficult for students to exercise their right to vote. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also flag one of the most suppressive types of laws that keeps 1 in every 13 African Americans and over 6 million eligible voters from voting each year. And those are felon disenfranchisement statutes. And just last week, the 11th Circuit reversed a trial court and a panel of the 11th Circuit. This was an en banc court that issued its decision, meaning the entire full appellate court weighed in and held that Florida can require returning citizens to pay all fines and fees associated with their criminal conviction before restoring their right to vote. And many of you watching this may recall that in 2018, Florida voters had a ballot initiative to allow returning citizens, people who were coming out of prison, to restore their voting rights automatically. And this decision is against the will of the people. It's against the will of voters, and it stands to disenfranchise many voters in Florida. And we know that Florida was ground zero for the 2000 elections, which is where I got my start in voting rights work. And I hope it won't be a repeat offense, but more than that, I hope that, that these individuals who are eager to participate in our democracy, eager to have their voices heard, will have their right to vote restored. So that's just a sampling of some of the challenges that we're facing. And our sister organizations are also bringing critical lawsuits defending against voter suppression in many other states as well.
Judd, as you prepare in Colorado, what are some of the kind of major things? Let's look at a kind of a good example of what a state can do when it really puts its mind to it. What are the things that you're doing to make sure that as large as possible a percentage, if you want to make a prediction, that would be great, of Colorado citizens get the actual cast their vote?
Well, the key to increased turnout is registration. Registration is the gateway drug to voting. So you have to get people registered, especially if you're a vote by mail state. If you're a vote by mail state, registration means you'll get a ballot in the mail. And so we take registration very, very seriously. We prioritize it at every turn. We're in ERIC, the Electronic Registration Information Center, which means that each election cycle we send a postcard to all of our eligible but unregistered potential future voters and invite them to register to vote, send them to our online voter registration site. That's a big deal. Being in ERIC is an incredible win for us because it also allows us to clean our voter registration file so that when we send out our ballots, we don't send to bad addresses because we've gone to such a great lengths to clean our file. So you really need to do those kinds of things to improve the administration of your elections. Colorado also has automatic voter registration, meaning that every person that goes to a DMV is automatically registered or their file is automatically updated. We are the new Oregon. Oregon was the first state to do a completely back-end system, and now Oregon no longer does a complete back-end system. So I guess we are the only Oregon now. So we're pretty proud of that, and that system works really well. It's a lot of people registered, a lot of information updated. So there are a couple of things that really, I think, put us in a very good position to drive up registration, get a lot of ballots in people's hands, and give people the best opportunity to vote. And to go to the prediction side, I will say that given the interest in this election and the fact that we've gotten our voter registration over 90%, so 90% of the eligible population of the state of Colorado is registered to vote. Because of those two sort of essential facts, I believe that 80% is within reach for eligible turnout in this upcoming election. No state has ever gotten to 80% turnout from eligible. And I'm not talking about registered. I'm not talking about your active registered. I'm talking about eligible, the people that could have voted if they registered in that election. I think Colorado and maybe Minnesota are really well positioned to potentially get to 80% turnout in this election, which would be an amazing leap and frankly, something that all states should be shooting for.
Karen, all right, you heard it first. You heard it first here from Judd Choate. Colorado's going to hit 80%, which will be fabulous. Karen, from Common Cause's work, what are the things that you're most pushing for most strongly?
There's a couple things. One is, when we saw the COVID affecting.
Actually, Karen, let me interrupt you for a second. Sure. After Karen finishes, we're going to go to questions and answers from the audience. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll take a look and try to get to them. Sorry, Karen, but I wanted to give people a little forewarning that they should get on the board if they want to get on the board.
So shortly after, we saw the impact of COVID, we really worked to, at the state level, in coalitions with our allies, to fight for eligible voters to have options and the ability to vote safely. So they didn't have to choose between their health and the right to vote. So by mail, voting safely in person, or at curbside or drop-off voting locations. And so one of the things is we worked in coalition to pass election administration reforms to make it easier. So worked for 5 new states who will have mail ballots they will be mailing ballots to all voters. 10 new states that will mail ballot applications to all voters. 3 new states that will allow no excuse absentee voting. 7 states that will allow voters to use the risk of COVID as a reason to vote by absentee. 10 states have added drop boxes as an option for returning ballots. 3 states have removed witness requirements for absentee ballots. And so, moving some of those gives people in those states more options. We're also doing election protection work that is, more important than ever. We're facing, a number of challenges. First,
Karen, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so we've been working on election protection because that's critically important, and we face some challenges. One is that we have a shortage of poll workers. About 25% of poll workers are 71 years or older. And so these are people who are at risk for getting COVID. And so it's created a big shortage, and we're working with our allies to encourage people to sign up to be poll workers, encouraging states to change their rules so state employees can be poll workers without taking time off, and looking for other ways to encourage people to participate. We've also been working to educate voters about changes in vote by mail. We're seeing a lot of changes, and also with litigation, there can be last minute changes. So how do we communicate?
Karen, you're muted again.
Touching anything. Sorry. I'm not touching anything, so I'm not sure why it's muting. But the goal is to educate voters about changes in election laws, whether there has been changes because we have moved some reforms, or whether there are going to be changes as a result of litigation. And because that there is not enough money going to states, it is falling on many groups in the outside, nonpartisan groups, to communicate to voters about changes that are made. We also have challenges around disinformation. And so part of our election protection work is to be recruiting volunteers and training them to look online through social media for cyber suppression efforts. The goal is both to push platforms, Twitter and Instagram, Facebook and others, to take disinformation down, but also so that we can respond rapidly if there is, I think there was during a Missouri primary, there was information that was incorrect. And so doing peer-to-peer texting to voters to let them know about changes in polling locations becomes important. The other thing is doing some work to inoculate people about disinformation that may be coming down the road. One is changing expectations that we are not going to see, the election results on election day, and probably not the day after election day. With about 40% of people voting by mail, it is going to take time to process and count those votes, and it's more important to get the vote right than to get it fast. And so making sure that we are educating people about that becomes really important. And then finally, as part of our election protection work, we work with 200 different organizations to set up a hotline with attorneys that answer questions, the 1-866, our vote line, to answer questions that voters have. We have roving poll monitors that go around to places where we know there are problems and we've seen vote suppression, to help voters and also make sure that they can text or call the hotline for questions that they have. It's a way to also help resolve problems with election officials who want the elections to go smoothly. And then we also are recruiting lots of folks to be to be disinformation monitors, so that we are communicating with platforms, and also rapidly responding to questions or problems that crop up.
Great. That's a lot. And I want to put a little bit of a pin in something that you said early in what you were saying, Karen. And that is that a lot of states, I mean, we give a lot of attention, and properly so, to the states that are throwing up roadblocks. But actually, a lot of states have been, in large part because of the pressure from organizations like Common Cause and like the Legal Defense Fund, have made changes for the better, have opened up absentee balloting, have given no excuses where there used to have to be excuses, have lengthened the counting period. So I think that there is real, you can make progress on these issues. And I think the fight is really, really important. All right, let's go to a few of the questions. I have one. We were talking about the Postal Service, from Ann Eldridge, who says, I've been making hundreds of phone calls and sending thousands of texts to voters in Pennsylvania. Although we are urging voters to vote by mail, there's widespread resistance to it because of the rhetoric being spewed by the president, and especially distrust of the USPS. I'm worried that in-person voting will overwhelm the system. Do you think that advocates should pivot to putting a major emphasis on that? Or, slight translation of the question, and you're all muted, by the way, is, what's the proper mix? What should we be telling voters to do in terms of making a plan of how to vote? Anybody want to jump in and take that?
One of the things that we are talking to people about, if they want to vote by mail, and that is an option in their state, to request their absentee ballot. If they need to request it early, fill it out as soon as you get it, and make sure that you are mailing it in by October 20th if you're mailing it in. There may be options in your state to drop it off in a mailbox or a drop box, and we would encourage people to do that as well. So the goal is to have make sure that this gets in early. So if people want to vote by mail because they are concerned about showing up in person, do it as quickly as you can, and mail it in as soon as you can.
It feels to me. Go ahead, Janai.
Yeah, we're encouraging those who are able to vote in person to vote in person, because that is the surest way of ensuring that your ballot is counted. At the same time, no one should put their health and well-being at risk, or should have to do that. And so that's exactly why we recommend the same thing that Karen just said, which is, get your method of voting early. If you're requesting an absentee ballot or need to request it, and if you're in Colorado, you don't have to do those things. And Colorado is doing such a fantastic job of making this process easier for all voters. But if you're in a state that requires you to request a ballot, request it now. If there's an opportunity for you to cast that ballot early at a drop-off center that's safe and secure, do that. Find out what your options are. This is not the election where you can just waltz into a polling site or decide at the last minute that you're, just going to enter the fray without having a plan A, B, and C on how you're going to ensure that your ballot is cast. So if you can do it in person, by all means do it. Prepare to wait if it turns out that there are long lines. Prepare to have transportation if you need it. Do everything you can to make sure that you don't compromise your ability to cast a ballot in this all-important election.
Great. And, there's a third leg here, which is, I think it's 37 states that allow early voting in person. So a way, if you haven't done your mail-in ballot and you're concerned about going and waiting on a line or being with a lot of people, in many, many states, obviously check and see which ones yours is. There's a window anywhere from 5 days to 45 days of different states where you can go and vote in person, either through a drop box or going into the clerk's office, and very much avoid the lines that way. Okay. Let's see. What's another question that we have here? Janai, this is to you. It's other than Alabama, Louisiana, and Florida, what are some of the other states that you're most concerned about? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah. The Legal Defense Fund is a nonpartisan organization. So we have been doing election protection work for, decades. And we are part of the 866 Our Vote coalition of organizations that engages in election protection. We also have a very targeted election protection project called Prepare to Vote, which does a lot of the work I described in terms of making sure voters are educated and armed, but also a voting rights defender project. And we're focusing on states that have a significant African-American population, regardless of whether they're quote unquote swing states or, purpling states, or regardless of the partisan outcome, we're there to protect the vote of all voters, and particularly African-American voters who have been historically marginalized. So we are in the states that I referenced earlier, as well as Georgia and Kentucky and Mississippi, and a whole slew of other states where there's been a history of voter discrimination. There's been a history of marginalizing communities, not just in these general elections that happen, but in small local elections. And we have a long history of relationships with local community organizations and individuals that we work with, like, Prairie View A&M. And that's where our focus is, and that's where we're most concerned. But of course, in the battleground states, there are a lot of instances of voter suppression, and some of those, overlap with where we're focused. But those are obvious places where those are hotspots.
Okay. Well, there are two grim, keep you up at night themes in some of the questions here. So I'll ask them only to return to a hopeful note afterwards. The first is several people have asked about the possibility of violence or intimidation at the polls. Karen mentioned this earlier, that there is the possibility of, recruited, and possibly even armed people coming to the polls to try to do that. So I'm going to throw this to you, Judd, because you've obviously got to be thinking about how you would deal with this if you started to hear reports a week or so out that this was going to happen. What do you do?
Yeah, well, I suspect every state has a law or a series of laws related to this kind of activity. Colorado does, and we have a history of dealing with incidents like this. Remember in 2012, we had a series of sort of bicycle gangs that were traveling around from various VSPCs at that's what we call our polling places, voter service and polling centers. And we sent the FBI and the U.S. Attorney after him, and they flagged him down at one of their polling places and told him to cut it out, and they went home and they stopped it. So that's like one incident, but we have a law on the books about that. There's also a federal law related to voter intimidation. So there are ways that you can curb that kind of activity. You just have to be prepared for it. We have meetings scheduled right now with the FBI, with the U.S. Attorney, with our local Attorney General's office and others. So they're all queued up. They understand what the issues are, and they're ready to combat them if they were to arise on election day. I think a larger, more complicated question might arise if the president followed through on the idea of sending National Guard or some other federal sort of empowered organization to polling places. I think that creates some jurisdictional problems that I'm not really sure how we would address. But fortunately, for all of you that are concerned about such things, there is a federal law on the books that says that a federal law enforcement officer cannot be in a polling place. So they could stand outside a polling place, but they can't be in a polling place. So we have this pretty much cornered. I don't lose a lot of sleep over these particular kinds of issues. I think there are others that have much more merit.
Okay. And let me go to the last of the grim scenarios that is generating a lot of conversation, and just quickly get your kind of thoughts on it. And that is, what does happen if, we'll say it in a nonpartisan way, either of the candidates refuses to abide by the results and basically said, I was robbed, it was rigged, and we don't accept it. What do you think can happen then? Janai? Oh, you're muted again.
Thank you. So we have an apparatus for contested elections. We saw it play out in 2000. There are various deadlines that ought to be met. You have the potential of the Supreme Court intervening, as we know in Bush versus Gore on December 12th of 1999. The Supreme Court decided that the ballot counting should not continue, which ultimately decided the election. So there are a lot of variables, even though there are laws that govern what ought to happen. The intervention of the court and its rulings on whether those procedures should be followed could ultimately be determinative. Of course, if we have a holdover and we go past January 20th, and let's, in a hypothetical scenario, if Trump were to decide not to leave office, if he ultimately did lose, we'd have a Nancy Pelosi government. So there are all sorts of incentives to think about, how to prepare for a resolution to this election that's, I don't want to say it's necessarily going to be contested, but many people will not readily accept the results. And one of the recommendations that I helped to make in a report called Fair Elections in Crisis is to impanel a bipartisan, or better yet, nonpartisan group of individuals who could come up with some rules of engagement ahead of the election that everyone would buy into, so that we have a process for resolving what is going to be a challenging election count no matter what. That may not be likely to happen, but that's the way in which we need to approach this as a country, very soberly, and to ensure that our democracy is not destabilized, as Judd said at the very outset, that this is really an existential crisis that we're facing. And if we don't get it right, the cost could be extraordinarily high.
Okay. Karen, do you want to add to that at all?
I agree with that.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, I think we are planning in the course of this series later on, as we get closer to the election, to have a session that is specifically devoted to what are the potentially post-election scenarios that we're most concerned about. Okay. Is there any other questions here? All right. I want to come back. We can come back to a last question, but I do want to come back to, we have 10 minutes left, to my kind of third question that I had for you. And that is, what gives you the most hope? I don't think all of you have been in this business for a very long time. I don't think you can do that unless you have hope. So I'm guessing that the work that you're doing and the things that you're doing also, and the things that you see other people doing, gives you some hope. Karen, I think I'll start with you. What gives you hope in this moment?
Lots of things give me hope. One is, many of the kinds of reforms that we have talked about, and many of our allies have talked about for decades, are now part of the public vernacular. Vote by mail and other things that most people never thought about or advocated for. People are understanding why it can make a difference and be more inclusive. We are seeing so many new organizations and activists and donors engage in this work. They understand what's at stake. I am really inspired by the Black Lives Matters movement that come out and fight for justice and transformative reform, not going back to where we were 4 years ago, but demanding the justice that they deserve. And so raising the stakes about what this means to me is incredibly important. I also think that there are many opportunities for people to engage. If you were, if you would like to be a poll worker, go to powerthepolls.org. If you would like to join us in the election protection effort, if you're an attorney that could do the hotline, if you are interested in social media disinformation monitoring, go to protectthevote.net and join the thousands of volunteers that are going to be out there working to protect voters, working with election officials, working with the groups like the Legal Defense Fund that are bringing litigation in the moment, if needed, to extend hours for people so that if they're standing in line, they can vote. All of those things really matter. And the more people that engage, the better off we'll be.
Judd, what about you?
Yeah, I have a really good answer to this. There are fantastic elections administrators all around the country in every jurisdiction, every county, every parish, every township, every state office who really believe in this. You wouldn't do this work, you wouldn't get paid the pittance that we get paid and work the incredibly long hours to get, trashed in the newspaper if you didn't really, really believe in this work. So, and those people are really motivated to get people registered, to get ballots in people's hands, to get those ballots counted and tabulated, done legally, fairly, openly, in ways that everyone can believe the outcomes. So while there is a whole bunch of noise out there and a whole bunch of things that we should really legitimately be concerned about, one of the things that you should feel really good about is that there are fantastic people running your elections, and they really believe in what they're doing, and they believe that you should have the chance to vote. So that's one thing that you should feel really good about. And by the way, that's not about Democrats and Republicans. That's not about unaffiliated or or third party. I mean, that's across the board, people that really believe in this work. So that gives me great hope.
Janai?
Yeah, I think that's really important because we can often feel, we can point out all the issues with our election system and not recognize the people that are making this happen and sacrificing so much to ensure that we exercise our constitutional right to vote. So that makes me hopeful. There are many other things that make me hopeful, even if they don't quite put me to sleep at night. But what really does get me going every day is the number of people who are, checking their voter registration, which you can do at, NASS.org. Can I vote? People have told me I check my registration. I'm preparing to vote. Those who are signing up to be the next generation of poll workers, as Karen pointed out, both to protect the health and safety of our elder force of poll workers who have sustained our elections for so many decades, but also to ensure that there are shorter lines at the polls, that people get the information that they need. And we have partnered with LeBron James's new organization, More Than a Vote, to get more people and younger people civically engaged. So yes, powerthepolls.org is where you can go to become a poll worker. You can report any changes that you're seeing to your local election system that we should be aware of to 866-OUR-VOTE. We also have a website, voting at NAACPLDF.org, which is a one-stop shop for all sorts of voting information, including census and redistricting, census, which is happening now, and redistricting later down the road. But all of this is part of that civic engagement ecosystem that we hope everyone will become engaged in. And, I'm just hopeful because of the many people I encounter who are eager to register and vote, and as importantly, to hold elected officials accountable once they're in office. And as has already been mentioned, I am extremely hopeful because of the legions of American people who are continuing to use the power of peaceful protest to bring a greater focus on inequities in our society, starting with racism and police violence, but not ending there. And people who I hope will march all the way to the ballot box on November 3rd to register their protest there as well. I probably could not say it better than the founder of the Legal Defense Fund, Thurgood Marshall, who later became the first African-American justice, when he said, where you see wrong or equality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on. And we have an obligation to pass it on better and older than we found it. And that work really starts now.
Great. Well, before I give my hopeful prediction, I want to thank the three of you for a terrific set of presentations. I want to thank people who tuned in. We were at over 200 people tuning in today, so that's great. And repeat that the event will be up on the Ash Center YouTube channel and the Ash Center website. And speaking of the website, I would certainly encourage everybody to go to it, to keep an eye on it for future events that are coming up. These will be every Tuesday. All right, and here's my last hopeful prediction. I've been involved in this kind of work for about 35 years, and I've watched from when same-day voter registration was in 6 states to now it's in 23. Early voting was almost unheard of. But now it's in, one of the people said 43. I used the 37, so I'll have to check our stats here. But anyway, lots, pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. And all that had results. I followed the 2018 midterm turnout very closely. And in 2014, there were 87 million people who voted. In 2018, it was up to 119 million. Okay, a gigantic increase. So my prediction is that a combination of people absolutely determined to vote, a combination of the changes that have been made to make it easier to vote is going to make this the largest turnout election ever. In 2016, 137 million people voted. I believe that 150 million people are going to vote in this election, and those Americans will have their voices heard. And that's what gives me hope. All right, I want to thank everybody for coming. Again, to the panelists, great to see all of you, and we will see you at events in the future. Thanks very much.